Welcome. Today, as you can read, we are doing a big thing on Unity Audio. We talk a lot about Fmod here. Pretty much in every single session, I talk about how great Fmod is and how lovely it is to use, but constantly forget that Unity has built-in audio stuff. So we might as well talk about it, figure out how it works, figure out the ins and outs of it, and then if we don't want to use Fmod or if we're on a project that isn't using Fmod, um, like I found myself in a couple weeks ago and in the future I will, then you know how to use it. So it's great. You might as well learn how to use it because the more you know, the better life is, I guess. I don't know, the more opportunities you get. So, moving swiftly forward, just to briefly go over what we're going to be talking about this week. Um, so we got the project settings. It's always good to go over those since there are a few audio specific things in there. We're just going to be talking about the different types of audio assets you can import and create in Unity. All the different components you can add onto game objects, the import settings for said imported audio assets, the mixer, and just a couple of optimization tips. I cannot speak right at the end. And then, then we'll be talking about who is coming next week. But in case someone leaves, I'm going to bring this up right here, right now. Next week, make sure you show up because we are having a guest speaker. His name is John. He's a great guy. And he works at Scythe Dev Team, who are known for Happy's Humble Burger Farm and all the other great games in the Scythe saga. So make sure you come up. He's going to be great. He's a great guy. And yeah, it'll be super insightful. First guest speaker of this semester, so you don't want to miss it. Anyways, shilling aside, let's move on to the project settings and get this started. So, basically, you open up the edit dropdown, you click project settings, and you'll click on audio, and you'll see this little box right here. So basically, the important ones you gotta look at are global volume. Obviously, if that's set to 0, you won't hear anything. So generally set it to 1. I'm pretty sure you can expose that parameter so that you can just change the global audio, but generally there are better ways to do that. So just leave that at 1 unless you don't want sound for some reason. Some of the other important ones, the Doppler factor, if you set that to 0, it disables the Doppler effect. So just so everyone's on the same page, Doppler effect is when you have an object moving and you're stationary, and the pitch changes depending on where it is. So like when cars drive by you and they go like, the pitch goes down because they are approaching you. Then it's going up, and then as it continues driving, the speed does a thing. I'm explaining this horribly, but the pitch changes with movement.
I
For
can explain Doppler if you would like.
That'd be great because I
Cool.
already need a drink.
So, so, um, as an object, like a car is coming closer towards you, the waves of sound are accelerating towards you. So you can kind of imagine that as like a compounding effect, and then after it passes you, the sound increase pitch and then decrease pitch.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know why I was struggling with that, but yeah, um, think of boats and the wake of a boat. Um, sound waves are kind of like that. Um, Hence why they're called waves, and that's why science called them waves because water is very similar. But all you need to know about this, if you want it to happen, that is a great video Miles posted. Definitely watch that Scruffy video. I'll I'll put it in the description of the YouTube video too. Why not? But Doppler factor of 1 means it's on. Doppler factor of 0 just cuts off all the Doppler effect. So that's what you want to do if you don't want it. DSP, buffer size. More times than not, you're gonna want to go for best performance here. because the other options, using performance as a leverage for a higher quality effect, a lot of the time in games with a ton of sounds going on, you're not going to notice it. Even people that are really looking for it probably won't notice it. So just go for best performance. And the last few things, max virtual voices. Keep it bigger than you expect. That's basically the amount of audio sources that might not be playing, whereas the max real voices are the ones that are playing at once. So that brings me to max real voices. Make sure that's big enough to play everything important at once. But generally, you want to leave these how they are unless you're facing issues with things being cut off and that sort of thing. And we will come back to these briefly when we get to prioritization in a couple slides. And last but not least, virtualize. You're going to want to leave this on. Virtualizing effects basically just dynamically turns on and off effects and spatializers on audio sources in the scene that are disabled just to save on CPU. So, and it doesn't even have to be disabled. Let's say you're too far away from an object, you're completely out of its zone, you can't hear it. Virtualize effects, basically this will turn off all the effects on it, so it'll just save a bunch of CPU, save a bunch of memory. Right, so moving now on to audio assets. So this is the stuff you're going to be importing. There's just a couple of things here, but we're going to go really in depth with all of this stuff. So to start off, exactly what you'd think you need audio. So it's exactly what you'd expect. There's a ton of different formats that are accepted, and basically you just drag and drop it into Unity. There's the MP3s, there's Vorbis files, there's waves. You can use audio interchange file format if you want to be unique and quirky, I guess, and you can also have tracker modules. It supports a lot of stuff, but generally it supports the things that you want, like wave files, Vorbis files, and MP3s. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to use wave files. Just keep it uncompressed when you're loading it into Unity, because in the import settings, you can compress it, and then when you build a game, in the build, it will be the compressed version. Or when you play the game in editor, it will be the compressed version. So you might as well start with the highest quality and then compress it for the actual build. Alright, audio mixer. This is created in the assets folder. You basically just right click, click create, and then near like the middle point, there will be an audio mixer. And same thing in the on the top toolbar. So this creates an asset. It is essential for mixing to have at least one of these, but you can make a couple of them and then drag and drop them under it. And it does have its own window, which we'll get into towards the end of this presentation, which has a bit more of the information, because this alone doesn't really say much. But yeah, you can drag and drop other mixers on it if you want to have a sub mixer. You can apply effects in there, you can change pitch of things, you can automate things. It's fantastic. Yeah, we're going to talk about it all in details, but this is what it looks like. The big mixer thing, that's just the main icon, and then when you click on it, it opens up this big tree, and each of those things are different buses or mix groups that I've built in that mixer. So we'll be showing that off later. Alright, now on to audio components. So this is the stuff that will be in the inspector that you can just add on to things. And what we're mainly going to be looking at here is the audio source component, which is the main thing you're going to be dealing with. As expected, this is the source of audio. This will play the audio clip through the mixer group. So basically you just drag in an audio clip, drag on a mixer group, and it will play that clip through that group, obviously. And it's got to be picked up somewhere. It's heard through audio listeners, which we'll get to in this section. And just a few of the main things in this component, since there is a lot of settings here. Mute drops volume to 0. It does not unload the sound. That is important because If you have it set to mute, it will still be using memory, and it will still be using CPU, even though you can't hear it. So if you want something gone, do not click mute. Just completely just disable the object or the component. Yeah. It's got bypass effects, which you can toggle whether or not it enables the effects, as you can expect, or bypasses them. And it's the same thing with the listener effects. So that's any of the effects that are applied to the listener, which we'll get to when we get to effects. Like most GSD sessions, we'll get to a lot of things. And bypass reverb zones, which are a thing that we will talk about very shortly. Then you got play on awake and loop. If play on awake is not checked, you'll need to play it through scripting to just use the play function. Otherwise, it will play when the object is created. So you got play on awake. When the object wakes up, or is enabled, or is created, it will play the sound. And loop basically just loops the sound over and over again until something tells it to stop. Right, now for some of the rest of the stuff on here, you got priority. This is where the voice limit comes in, that we talked about earlier in the settings. If somehow you go over the voice limit, it will cut off any of the sounds that are a lower priority, but also it has something to do with the volume and the distance. So if you have a ridiculous amount of sounds playing at once, definitely look into this a bit more. But generally speaking, if you have something set to a higher priority, it will play. And if you have something set to a lower priority, it will be cut off first. So what I try to do, I use 0 priority, which is the highest priority possible for music, no matter what. And then increase priority of important sounds, so like UI, player sounds, etc. And then do like footsteps, general juicy noises, that kind of stuff that could be in low priority, unless it's obviously integral to be heard. Pitch changes the playback speed. That is something to account for. It's cool if you want to do a kind of a bend timing thing, which Anthony and I, when we remade his first year game, which I wasn't on the team for, there is a bullet time function in that, and yeah, it literally just alters the pitch, which slows it down, slows down the tracks, slows down every sound in the game, and it also changes the pitch as expected from a pitch changer. Right, now the last few things, you got stereo pan, which obviously that's just left or right or center. And then you got spatial blend. This is one of the cool things. Similarly to in Fmod, where you can have 2D events or 3D events, the spatial blend here is how 2D or 3D a sound is. So 2D means it plays uniformly. You can place it kilometers away from the listener, and you will hear it as if it's just listened to on, like, let's say you put on Spotify, you just click a song, it will sound like that. Just think of it as you're wearing headphones and it's a very, very long cable. But 3D sounds, that's the sounds in the world. So if you snap your fingers in front of you, you're going to hear it where it is, versus if somebody snaps their fingers across the street, it'll be a lot quieter. This accounts for position. And then last but not least here, before we get into the 3D sound settings, which are right at the bottom there, reverb zone mix. This is basically just how much of this sound gets mixed and routed into the reverb zone. So how much is affected by it. Alright, and now the 3D sound settings. There's a lot of stuff. Doppler level, once again, 0 is no Doppler effect, and 1 is just general, but you can crank this up to ridiculous levels if you really want to. Angle spread, it goes from 0 to 360. It's basically the spread of the sound in 3D. Roll-off volume over distance. There's a couple of different settings for this. There's logarithmic, which is the default one, and this is generally what sounds act like in reality, where the distance doesn't really change the volume linearly. It's more of a logarithmic change. But obviously, in real life, there's also the accounting for higher pitches moving faster, and then the low rumble coming later, and all that sort of thing. But generally speaking, volume roll off is logarithmic in real life. If you want to keep that, cool. If you want to do linear, you can change that here. If you want to do something really weird, you can do that here as well. All right, and then you got two other settings. You got min distance and max distance. Within the minimum distance, it will stay at its max volume. And in between min and max, it will attenuate. So wherever it is on that graph, the volume will change according to where it is between the two min and max distances. And after the max distance, it will no longer attenuate. Usually this means that the volume's at 0, but as you can see with this chart, you could take that last point at the max distance and just crank it all the way back up to 1. So that's why I'm not saying it's going to mute it. It just doesn't attenuate anymore after the max distance. All right, now reverb zones. This is a picture I got at the bottom left here from the Unity documentation, and it was basically just a general showing of what this does. So what the reverb zone does is it adds reverb to the clips in the zone, depending on the listener's location. And some cool things you can do is overlap zones. Like let's say you're going from one cave to another, or you're going from outside into like a cathedral area, and then in the cathedral there's a small side room that's really padded and quiet. So this is where you can overlap reverb zones so that the sounds do really cool things. And basically the diagram below, it shows that within the min distance it will do the full reverb. Within the max distance it will use the gradient reverb, and then after that it will no longer give the reverb. So very similar to the previous thing. And just going into all the settings there, so it's got about 25-ish, a few more than that presets, and then one custom one. One thing to note though is that when you pick a preset, you can't actually change the values. You need to go and do a custom setting to do that. But the important stuff about the different settings here, the decay time is measured in seconds. The high filter or high frequency decay is controlled by the HF ratio. Reverb delay, that's the delay in seconds once again. Diffusion, that's the echo density, and the density is also a percentage. So the density of the sound, let's say it's 100%, it'll be the loudest, versus 0, that'll be the least amount of reverb. And now the audio listener. Yes, this little tiny box is literally it. There are no settings. All it does is it receives input from the sources in the scene. It's usually attached to the camera, but that's usually the case for first person. Third person, you can experiment with the camera, or you can experiment with the audio listener's position. In my past work, I have found that somewhere between the player and camera is actually really great. So like keeping it like 2/3 between the player and camera is really good, so that allows for a bit more of a natural feeling soundscape, instead of just you are a floating camera with a floating set of ears picking up things. But one thing to note, each scene can only have one listener, so if you want to move this around, keep that in mind, that you'll need to put it on a different object or disable things at the right times. Yeah, that sort of thing. And last but not least here, before we hop into Unity and show off some of those things that I've been talking about, there are audio filters, which can be applied to objects with a source or a listener, so not reverb zone objects, which is a little sad, but this covers pretty much everything. So there's a bunch of options. There's a chorus, distortion, there's an echo, high pass, low pass, and a reverb. And the properties for all of these are what you would expect. The reverb properties are almost identical to the ones of the reverb zone. But yeah, there's a lot of different effects here. There's a lot you can do with this. And the order of the components is the signal chain. Yeah. And now let's quickly hop into Unity and hope that things don't get super janky. Alright, so we're in Unity. I haven't switched to streaming Unity yet because when you do that, things get weird. But basically, I have a really simple scene. It's just one empty game object. It's got the music loop, and it is sending this to the music bus in the mixer. It is not muted. It's not bypassing any effects. It is bypassing a reverb zone, which is disabled at the moment. It will play when it's awake, and it will play on a loop. The one thing I'm going to do here is set it to the highest priority. Not that it matters, there's two sounds, but yeah. And I want to set it to 2D because it's music, you want it to be uniform throughout the scene. And in addition to that, we got a cube. It's got a gunshot sound. It's playing through the sound effects group in the mixer. It is not muted. It also is play on awake, and it's also looped. This is just so that we can move it around and see how it reacts to being blended in 3D. So basically, it'll just loop the sound. I have a super basic movement script to move it around. And I got the mixer here, which we'll talk about shortly. But yeah, and then we got the main camera. It's just the camera object, but then we have the audio listener here in all of its lack of properties glory. So I am going to switch to the Unity scene. The stream will probably get weird now. It will probably get very small, but the point of this is just so that you can hear it. So I'm going to hit play. What you're going to hear is the music being uniform. It won't change. It'll just play exactly as it would if you just played the file. And I'm going to move the cube around a bit, and you'll hear the gunshot sound, attenuate differently as it's further away, and pan properly when it goes to the left and right. So we got music. And as you can see, it's a lot louder versus when it's really far away, and it's a lot quieter. Similarly, you put it over here, and it's playing through the left ear, and you put it over here, and it's playing mainly through the right ear. So, super basic, but that's the gist of it. And really quick, I'm going to enable the audio reverb zone. Yeah, I'm just setting it to generic, so super basic. It's the default preset. I don't know how much of this you can see at the moment, but all I'm doing is I'm enabling the reverb zone, so you will be able to notice the gunshot has a lot more reverb now. I'm just gonna hit play. So it's super prevalent when it's up close, especially with the music ducking every time it happens, but there's a lot of reverb on it. Alright, and switching back to my screen, and switching back to the slideshow. So I hope that was a bit of a good visual example and I guess audio example of this. And yeah, as you could tell, there was the volume ducking on the music, and we'll get to that when we get to the mixer. But I just wanted to show off a couple of these things. Right, actually real quick. So we got all these effects and stuff. So I'm just gonna click on music. Basically what you do is you go add component, audio, and they're all here. And adding the chorus, let's say, this, basically you just change it here, you play, and it will add this effect to it. Pretty much as simple as that. So now let's move forward with the import settings. So this you're definitely going to need to look at every single time you import an asset. It is very important, especially if you're doing a WebGL build. You're really going to want to be careful about memory usage. So this is a pretty important one. So import settings, this is what you see when you click on any sound in the file explorer in Unity, and this will give you a ton of settings, mainly just to optimize the file size and how it'll be handled in memory. So just to go through everything here, since honestly everything is really important. Force to mono, as you would expect. This takes a stereo file and mixes it down to mono. If the sound is already in mono, obviously it doesn't do anything. It'll just leave it be. And this is pretty necessary to cut down on space if you have a ton of sounds that don't necessarily need to be stereo. Like UI sounds, sound effects that are placed in the world, and generally most 3D sounds, you will want these to be mono. Because stereo, it's 2 channels, they're both the same size. When you switch it to mono, that's cutting half of the channels out. And same thing if for some reason you have a 5.1 mixed audio track, you put that in Unity, if it even accepts that, which to be completely honest with you, I'm not sure if it does. But in that case, it would cut down everything, cut the file size down a ridiculous amount to just have 1 channel. So it's great for that. Load in background, this is important. You're going to want to check this off for sounds you won't need right away, as it loads the sound in the background. So it's better to do this, especially for bigger tracks like music or ambience as well. So like you have one scene open, but you want a certain sound effect to play when you do something, or you want to load in the music already, you click load in background, and when you get to that, it will work. And you won't need to wait for it at all. So it can dramatically help decrease loading times when you're loading into something. Ambisonic, this is something you probably won't need to worry about 9 times out of 10, since this is specific to a format that's based along the listener's orientation for 360-degree videos and that sort of thing. It exists, but generally, if you don't know what it is, or you're not doing that kind of thing, don't worry about this. Don't click it. Compression settings. This is the most important thing, I would say. So I have a couple different overrides here. As you can see, I have the default. There's the monitor, which means the PC Mac Linux standalone override, and I have the WebGL override. If you have more build platforms in your Unity, you'll have more things here. And each of these do have slightly different settings, and mobile has one very distinct change that I will bring up. But generally, all the default stuff works for everything. So we'll just be going over that. So starting off, we got the load type. There's 3 load types. There's decompress on load, which is better for small sounds since, as you would expect, it'll decompress the audio when it's loaded. However, each of these options do change depending on the compression format as well. So for this one in particular, Vorbis is usually the best setting for this, as it reduces the overall size of the application and the download, but has also minimal decompression time. Again, small sounds for this one work best. And then you got compressed in memory. This keeps it in memory and decompresses it while playing. For this one, you're going to want to use longer files for this. And honestly, either choose Vorbis with reduced quality or ADPCM, since less memory equals less CPU used to decompress it. Just don't use PCM with this one, since PCM is just straight up uncompressed audio. So essentially just loading one big file into memory with 0 benefits of doing so, like decompressing it when it plays. So it'll just be loading it. It'll be like, okay, let's decompress it. Oh, there's nothing to decompress. Cool. Which isn't super kosher since the next option exists. Streaming, it does exactly that. It streams the clip directly from your disk and doesn't load it into memory. So for this one, you're going to want to use this for music, ambience, other longer files, and PCM is the way to go for this, since it offers decreased CPU load compared to the other options, because the other options need to decompress it, but this just loads up a file and it's good. No memory at all, since it's just reading from disk, and better audio quality when compared to the others. But the only issue here is that it does increase the application side or size when you build it. So just be careful of how big these things are, and if it does get big enough that you want to shrink it a bit, just slap 80 PCM on it and call it a day. So as you could see by those three, each of those different options on how to load assets in trades a certain amount of memory for CPU usage. So basically you just want to figure out what balance you want to strike there. Alright, now to just blast through the next few options real quick. You got the preload. Preload is interesting because it loads all the info on a clip, like its length, all the play settings, but it doesn't actually load the audio just to save a bit of memory. Not having this checked off will cause an extremely slight delay when trying to play a sound, especially when you got a lot of sounds going at once. So with the trade of taking less memory, but at the same time, it's not a ton of memory it's taking up. So you can really choose whether you want to do this or not. If things are being played a lot, you might want to leave those in, and rarer sounds you can take out. But the gist of this is that you can manually load and unload things when not needed. Compression format. There are 3 of these. Once again, we went over them. You got PCM, which is just straight up uncompressed, Vorbis, and ADPCM, which all work best with the certain load types like we just talked about. But here, since I already went over that, I'll just go over what they actually mean. PCM is uncompressed, so this is all the big files. Unity says it's best for short sounds. I would personally say it's best for stuff that you want to load quick and completely uncompromising with its audio quality. So personally, I use it for music. Yeah. Vorbis, that's OGG. It's a great file format, great compression format. It maintains a ridiculous amount of quality, more than MP3. It's surprisingly good. So you're going to want to use this for most things that you come across, but the only issue here is that it is the most compressed format, so it will naturally use the most CPU. And last but not least, you got ADPCM, is stuff that's mildly compressed. It's good for stuff that's played frequently and a lot at once. Unity says footsteps, impacts, weapon sounds, that sort of thing is great for ADPCM. And just really quick, mobile has an additional setting. It's MP3. Generally, you don't want to use that in anyways. Just go with Vorbis since it's better in almost every respect. Alright, now quality. It's just a slider from 1 to 100. As expected, the file gets smaller as you decrease it, but it does lose quality. Something to note is that for some sounds, there will absolutely be more noticeable changes than with others. So just doing a blanket quality number isn't exactly the best way to do it. So try to do this on a case-by-case basis with sounds. But at the same time, it's not a linear relation between the quality slider and the imported size. So with one file, for example, I had it at 17.1 kilobytes at 100%, and I got it to a bit under half at a bit above half, 8.9 kilobytes at 43%. So I cut a chunk of it off. But at the same time, when I dropped it all the way from 43 to 1%, it was still 8.9 kilobytes. So eventually you do get diminishing returns as you go lower. Though, once again, this is very much on a case-by-case basis. What you do want to try to do and aim for is to reduce the file size where you can without sacrificing artistic intent or too much quality. But if you're aiming for a WebGL build, aiming for optimal memory without too much quality loss is probably the way to go. And now the last one, we got the sample rate setting, which we got 3 options: preserve, optimize, override. Preserve, as expected, will keep whatever sample rate the file is. So if that's 22.05 kilohertz or 96 kilohertz or even higher, since somehow Unity supports up to 192, this will just load it in at whatever sample rate it's at. Optimize will set the sample rate according to the highest frequencies of the file. So most files I've found in my experience will go up to, or I'll load them in at 96 or 48, and then it will drop them down to 48 or 44.1. And then you got override, which will allow you to manually reduce the sample rate or increase it for some reason, with values of 8 kilohertz, 11.025, 22.05, 44.1, 48, 96, and once again, for some reason, 192 kilohertz if you're insane and just want to do that. But as this works with audio editing and just everything kilohertz related or sample rate related, this will chop off anything that's not in the frequencies, or that is in the frequencies that you cut off. So right at the bottom there, just to finish up on this slide, it will show you the original size of the file, the imported size. So that's the file size when you build it in the game. And below those, there's the ratio of the two. And note that you do have to hit everything, or hit apply for everything to, apply. And below all that is a little preview window where you can set it to autoplay when you click on the file if you want to. You can click it to loop, and so on. But note that this plays the imported version, so after the compression and everything you put on it. So it's good for you to test it out, make sure you're actually cool with its quality, and tweak it if you want to. And now onto the big one that I really didn't know existed until a couple weeks ago, a month ago or two, but that's the Unity Audio Mixer. So like we went over, it's an asset that you create in the asset folder, and I did allude to this. There is a window specifically for it. So you just want to go to the window. There should be Audio Mixer. You just click on that, put it wherever you want. I put mine at the bottom, right beside the file explorer, or whatever it's called in Unity. So yeah, I just leave it there, and it's big, helpful. But I digress. This is basically what it looks like. You have groups to the right, exposed parameters up above it in the top right corner, and on the left hand side you got the all the important stuff. So you got the mixers. These are just all the mixers that are things that you've created. So like I said, you can make more than one if you really want to, and this is where you select them. Snapshots, if you want to make different snapshots or different setups of the same mixer that you want to swap between, this is where you do it. And then you got groups. These are all the mix buses, and you can do sub buses, so you can drag stuff under it. As you can see, I got master, and then under the SFX bus, I've got NPCs, weapons, interactables, and under interactables, I have another group of sub buses, and so on. So there's a lot you can do here. It's super versatile. And last but not least, you got views, which are different layouts of the mixer, just for different situations. And I'll briefly show that off when I open up Unity again. Alright, so talking about groups, this is the important thing in a mixer. This is where things are routed, and this is where you can apply effects to every sound of this type. This is where you can change the volume, you can mute stuff, and this is where you can also automate things. So let's say you have a volume slider in your game, this is where you do it. So mixers, you can use these to do basic adaptive music, so stuff like introducing different layers. You can do that here as well. You got mute, solo, and bypass. Those three buttons are right below the volume mixer, or the attenuation mixer. Excuse me. And when you click on one of these, it's got a ton of properties you can add to it. You got pitch control, you got attenuation, volumes, and effects you can add. And through those effects, you can add stuff like sends. You can add the volume ducking like I did, and we'll go over that in the next slide. But routing, you can route mixers into another mixer. So you can grab one mixer, make it a sub mixer of the main one. If I say the word mixer again, I am going to scream. But you beyond that, you can also make groups and subgroups, like I did with the interactables and the sound effects. And now we got the effects that you can add. Just starting that off, sidechain compression is possible. As I was figuring out prior to the session and left in, you don't use that with an actual compressor, which is strange, but you use the duck volume effect and a send. So you take a send, you put that on the object that you want to duck the compressor, and then you add the duck volume on the thing that you want to duck. So you slap that on the music, you slap the send on the gunshot, and then in the send you'll click where you want it to go. So there you go, quick tutorial on how to do that. And the cool part here is that you can also expose parameters to automate actions, and then access them via scripting. So basically you just right click on the name of a setting in the bus. So in the example there, I used the attenuation volume, so I just right clicked on it, and right there it says expose volume of sound effects to script. And when you click on that, then you can access that via scripting, and in your infinite knowledge of code, you can make a volume slider or something like that. Super useful. You're going to want to use this. It will make your life easier, especially if you want to have options like that. But there are also transition overrides, which are right below that. There are different things that basically just change how the value of the setting interpolates when switching between different snapshots. So linear, that's what it's normally set to by default. So that'll just mean, okay, it's dropping from 0 to negative 40 when you're switching between things. Cool, we'll just drop that completely linearly. Or you can do squared, you can do square root, you can do brick wall, that sort of thing. Just experiment, figure out what you need for it if you're doing that. And let's hop once more back into Unity, and I will show off the mixer in all of its glory. So, I'm not going to stream Unity specifically, just so you can read everything and see everything without it doing the weird sub window thing. But basically this is the mixer down here. You got the main one. I only have one, but if you wanted another, you can click it, and then boom, it doesn't have the groups, and you could just switch between the two here. And if I really wanted to, I could add it to that, and boom, now there is this mixer inside of this one, which I'm going to delete right now. But like I said, in the assets view, there's the mixer. This is what it looks like. You got the snapshot, and you got the different buses here. Yeah, and you just create it by going here, create, and then down, up right here. I thought it was near the bottom for some reason, so yeah, but it's right there. You just click on that, or you can go under assets, create, same spot. And just while we're here, the inspector, here's everything you need to know that we talked about here with the inspector view. Yeah, but back to the mixer. You got this, you got the different mixers, you got the snapshots. Basically what the snapshots do is you can do this, make a new one, drop it to minus 56, and when you switch back here, look at that, it's back to 0. So you can also set it to start as the snapshot, but that's basically what you can do. You can favorite them if you want, or you can't, that was a lie. This basically just says what the starting snapshot is. I'm starting to fall over my words, but just to briefly go over this before we get into the groups, you got the views as well. I just made 3 to really just show it off basically. You got the everything group, which shows everything. You got the music, look at that, just the music, and you got sound effects. And the different way to do this is you just make a view, you click on it, and then, oh, you don't want the music to be shown? Cool. just click the eyeball. You don't want sound effects to be shown, cool, you just click the eyeball. And you don't want to show anything, you can just click that and it'll let you do that. It's really cool, very versatile, great for organization. But now onto this. So you got all the buses here, you got exposed parameters here, which let's just quickly talk about. You got master volume here. So basically what I did is I right clicked here and I clicked expose, and when you click expose it has that little arrow there. But with this you can add effects to it right here and here. You can change the color of it. Let's say you want this to be green, just so it stands out, even though I feel like red stands out more with these two. But again, additional organization. And you got the different effects here, so you can just add different things here. You got receives, you got sends. You can send it to different things and it will tell you if it results in a feedback loop and you can't send it, so that's cool too. But let's remove those, and just what I did for the ducking volume. So I made a send, put it on the sound effects, basically just sent it to be received by the music duck volume. Send level, it sends everything. And right after the attenuation, I added a duck volume, made it so that this is the threshold, so that every time it plays, you won't hear this, but I will, and YouTube will. It'll compress it when it gets to that. And one last really cool thing about this is that you can edit it in play mode and it will save, because anyone that's used Unity knows that usually when you're editing things in play mode, as soon as you unclick play, you realize, oh my god, I just wasted my time, it didn't save and I forgot what it was. But right here, you do this. Let's say I don't want the volume, or I don't want the music to be playing, just drop that. Then I click unplay, and look at that, it's still there. So super useful. Yeah, definitely use this if you're going for Unity audio. It is incredibly helpful. And now onto the last chunk, optimization tips. This is basically just to help you get your memory as small as possible, as well as CPU usage. Just get that as small as possible so your programmer team or your programming team doesn't yell at you, just so your art team doesn't yell at you, just so that you have a good running game, to put it weirdly. So one of the things I said earlier, but it is a big thing and I had no idea about this, disabling audio sources instead of muting them will disable them from memory. So if it's enabled, it will still be running in the background, and loading in memory, all that good stuff. So just don't worry about muting something unless you really do want to mute it and leave it running. But at the other hand, if you don't want it playing, anytime soon, just disable the effect. And last one, this is big, the audio profile. So this does show a ton of useful information. The profiler is really useful just for all, like literally everybody that's using the project, everyone that's working on it, because it has a ton of different modules. But for audio, it does have built-in stuff for Unity's audio system, so you might as well take advantage of it. And what we're going to be looking at here is the detailed view mainly, but under the main section of it, we got the audio module, which shows the amount of playing audio sources, the audio voices, the total CPU and total memory. And under the detailed view, it's got a ridiculous amount of things to look at. So it's got audio sources, you got playing and paused audio sources, the amount of voices being taken up. So if you hit that max number of voices, you'll know how many are being played. You got total audio CPU, you got how much of that's being taken up by effects, streaming, as well as other stuff. You got the total audio memory. I'm not compressing anything, so it's 500 megs, and everything else there. It's super useful, but at the same time, on the right, as all that's going on, you also got everything that's playing the sounds. So that's super cool. So you can use the profiler to really narrow down on things that are issues. You can optimize with this. It's incredibly useful. So I'm just going to open up and show you the other half of this since I cut off after the volume. So right here, as you can see, it's got a lot of info here, but I'm just going to hit play and mute audio. So in here you got the object, so it's the music object and the cube that are playing sounds, which are linked up with each of these assets, which when you click them, it will highlight not just the asset in the project view, but it'll also show it in the project or in the scene hierarchy. So that's super useful. It'll show the volume, the audibility, which again is what the voices actually tracks. So if something is a higher priority but it's further away, depending on how audible it is, this will change whether or not it's played. It shows the amount of plays. It shows whether or not it's 3D. Super useful. It'll show if it's paused or muted. So if I do this and I hit mute, would you look at that? It changes. Super cool. You got whether or not it's virtual, whether or not it's a one-shot, whether or not it's looped. The distance. When it's a 2D sound, it will say not applicable for a lot of this stuff. But here it will show the attenuation. Here it will show how long it's been playing and what part of the track it's at. So as you can see for the music, it's well past a minute. And this one, the gunshot, it won't pass like a bit over a second because right next to it we got the duration, and as you can see, this one's a lot longer than that one. But super useful. You got the different groups as well, so you can look at the mixing. You can see what's going where. For some reason it's not. I'm pretty sure it's... Oh, well, I don't know why it's not playing there. Oh well. But then you also got the channels and groups, which does show the volume of everything in there. And you can set it to reset the play count on play, or if you just want to leave it to figure out, okay, is the sound just looping forever? Let's see which one it is. And then you hit play and you're like, oh, cool. It's this one because I just played the scene. Everything's at 1 play, but this one sounds at 8,000 already. So it's good for debugging that way. And that is it. We got a couple references here. One of them was really useful for optimization, so I'll drop that. And the Unity documentation. This is just good to look over generally. And last but not least, next week, once again, we have got the composer and sound guy behind Happy's Humble Burger Farm, and a lot more. It is John coming in for a guest speaking session. Do not miss this. He's a great guy. It'll be fantastic. And thanks for coming out tonight. I'm going to drink some water.